Hello friends, it's another beautiful Monday here on League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thank you so much for joining us. And the LCS playoffs officially got underway on the weekend with some quarterfinal action. Obviously some surprises. Cough cough, G2 getting completely dismantled by Misfits. TSM survives against Echo Fox. It was mirrored in EU and NA. Actually not mirrored, it was the exact same. You had a 3-0 sweep and a 3-2 nail biter. We're going to go through each series and we've got some standout stats or a bit of information about those series that were absolutely incredible. Starting off, Echo Fox, TSM. Obviously the main culprit that people are saying underperformed in that series is Huni for Echo Fox, as he was underperforming really the last second half of the entire split, maybe even earlier than that. A definite drop off from his spring form. And I will say, before we get into the stat here, he was playing with food poisoning in this series, and he said he didn't get much practice time with any of his teammates the last week leading up to the quarterfinals because he was dealing with it. And if you've ever had food poisoning, it's absolutely horrible. So before we roast him too hard, let's just give him that caveat. But the stat I want to go with is in this best of 5 series, Huni had 20 deaths. Now that may sound like a lot. How much is it? Well, in the regular season, the KDA leader, definitely on Golden Guardians, only had 16 deaths in 18 games. So Huni had more deaths in 5 games than definitely had in the entire 18-game regular season. Now I know being the KDA leader isn't always that impressive, especially when you're on the last place team, but the fact that Huni died so many times and he was getting caught out, a lot of these deaths were preventable, especially in some of his Cho'Gath games where, yeah, you're at a disadvantage in the laning phase, but once you become that massive tank, you can probably avoid getting caught out as much as he did. Haunter clearly won that matchup in the top lane, and yeah, he had favorable matchups throughout the majority of the series, but definitely an underperformance from the likes of Huni. 100 Thieves and FlyQuest threw down, and again, it was a not clean 3-0 sweep for 100 Thieves. Why wasn't it clean? Well, the early game and pretty much all these matches, save for game 2, went in the favor of FlyQuest. So much so that their average gold difference at 15 minutes was positive 856. They had the tools to get things rolling and take an early game lead, to snowball an early game lead into a victory, but they could not get it done against 100 Thieves, whether it's the macro that they couldn't execute in the mid to late game, or just their overall communication. Who knows what it was, but clearly they were able to get things rolling early, and really, I think Santorin actually outclassed Anda in this matchup, even though the KDA isn't there. Obviously, 100 Thieves just completely clobbered later game team fights, but the early game was constantly going in the favor of FlyQuest, save for that second game. But they had legitimate chances to win game 1, and in game 3, they definitely should have won that game because they had by far the biggest lead, early game lead in this series, and a few miscues. Everyone's blaming this one play on Wild Turtle where he flashes in, but look how close he is to actually taking down Cody's son. And if his team follows up more, maybe you do that. But Flame also got caught out a couple of times before that. Just not really understanding the positioning of his teammates in the split push. They could not execute that split push game, which is another reason if they were able to do that, they would have snowballed that lead even more, because they just had gotten Baron buff and then he got caught out a couple times, pretty much completely wasted that big purple worm buff for 100 Thieves. So misplays in the mid game really cost them, and with that, their hope for Worlds is gone, but it means Clutch will be alive and will be playing in that first round of the Gauntlet series. Let's go to the series in EU, starting with that Schalke Splice game, which was the first best of 5 and the only one that went to 5 in EU, and it was a real barn burner. The standout stat for me in this set is really just the kills and the deaths in favor of Splice, because even though they lost in 5 and it was very back and forth games throughout, they were way ahead in the kill department, and Schalke, 5 of the 6 most deaths in the EU LCS over the weekend were Schalke players. Ottawamne took the cake with 17 deaths, but then 4 of the 5 Schalke members all died 11 times, and Amazing died 14. The fact that you have so many deaths across a best of as a team, everyone in double digits, and still come away with the victory is super impressive. And obviously, you got to be a little bit creative when you're losing team fights, just like they were in game 1, even though there's 4-5, hardly a mismatch when it comes to kills. But they were definitely creative in a macro sense. Definitely some misplays from Schalke and taking fights that they were better off not taking. Nukeduck and Upset both had some highly questionable positioning mistakes in some of these team fights, but despite all of that, they came out big in that 5th game. Upset was fantastic, and overall, his Kai'Sa play was really great, and just seeing him on a champion not named Ezreal was something that was I was happy to see, and happy to see him playing so aggressively, even though at times it really cost him and his team. When it was said and done, Nukeduck and Upset delivered for them, and Schalke, if they gotta die, it doesn't matter. They will die for turrets, they will die for objectives, and that's really the way to success, to find success when it comes to competitive League of Legends. Then we have G2 and Misfits, which I was pretty sure was going to be a 3-0 as well, but the other way. I thought G2 would be 3-0ing Misfits. Completely went the other way. Somehow Misfits turned it on. G2 looked lost. Wonder was underwhelming. Hjarnan was probably the best player alongside Perks. Jankos was pretty much invisible, as he had kind of been to close out the regular season, but Misfits looked a whole lot better despite Senkux not playing that well. And the standout stat from this series is really just Senkux's numbers from a 3-0 series sweep. When you look at them, you would think you lost this series because those are not very good for a team that won 3 games in a row in very convincing fashion. It was pretty much across the board, everyone else playing well. That kill participation sub 50% is a little bit insane for a mid laner. You look at Ryu in that 100 Thieves series, he was upwards of 90%. He almost had twice as much involvement in his team's play around the map. Ryu played out of his mind for 100 Thieves, deservedly got player of the series. Senkux, I mean, he was on Malzahar duty 2 out of the 3 games, which is basically, as we've seen in NA and Korea with Pole Belter and Crown, you're basically on Malzahar duty when you're not performing well, because it's one of those champions, you flash in and press R. They removed the mechanic where you even had to press W to put the pool down before you ultied. Now it just does it for you. So he was on Malzahar duty the last couple of games and really did not have much impact for Misfits. He didn't really have to, which is a shame because the first half of the split was all about Senkux performing well with Max Lore. The second half, he kind of slumped down a little bit, and I mean, maybe it's a positive. They didn't have to do much, but he was underwhelming in that mid lane for them. Luckily, Hansama, Max Lore, and Alphari. Alphari completely bodied Wonder in that top lane, who in spring was the consensus top or best top laner in EU. Alphari completely dummied him, and Hansama on his Draven is definitely a sight and looks fantastic. So Misfits completely turn it around and keep their world's hopes alive. G2! You got the Spain-Madrid jerseys, and you're not even going to be going to Spain, but Ocelot said he's still going to go there, just not representing G2. So you can still buy the jerseys. It's kind of like the championship jerseys that the NBA hands out for the team that loses in the finals, because they make them for both teams, and you can still get a cool little piece of memorabilia from an event, and it looks like G2 made it to the finals, but they never did.